what looked like a simple interior rearrangement inside one of Britain's most historic estates was actually a devastating metaphor for a family empire in its final act of erasure. In a single afternoon, a prominent silver frame photograph of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle vanished from its designated place inside Highgrove House, replaced by an image of King Charles cradling young Prince Louis. For the Duke of Sussex, a man increasingly defined by his distance from the crown, this was more than a domestic adjustment. It was a visual eviction, a public manifestation of a cold, calculated reality orchestrated by the one person who has quietly assumed total control of the royal narrative. By the end of this video, you will understand the intricate chess match currently being played behind the heavy doors of Buckingham Palace. You will see how a quiet war of image and access is being waged inside the royal household, why a monarch battling a profound health crisis is caught between familial longing and institutional survival, and how the ultimate outsider became the ultimate gatekeeper of the British crown. Most importantly, you will discover why the upcoming months represent a final, irreversible point of no return for a family fractured beyond recognition. To fully grasp the weight of this current displacement, we must look back at the gilded illusion that preceded the collapse. There was a time when Prince Harry was the undisputed favorite of the global public, the charismatic war veteran who injected a modern vitality into an ancient institution. His 2018 wedding was presented as a cultural milestone, a moment of immense privilege, wealth, and unmatched soft power. The world watched a young man who possessed everything, anchored by the absolute certainty of his father's affection and his place within a 1,000-year-old lineage. This golden era established a profound level of audience investment, which makes the current reality of commercial desperation and public isolation hit with such devastating force. The contrast is stark, shifting from the pinnacle of royal protection to a state where his very presence is treated as a strategic liability. The trajectory of this family warfare began to shift decisively following the historic transition of power. With the coronation, the internal hierarchy was crystallized, and King Charles made it explicitly clear that he regarded Camilla as his absolute equal, elevating her to a position of institutional influence that far outweighed any blood ties to California. But as the household transitioned into a period of unprecedented strain marked by the king's ongoing battle with cancer, the nature of that influence transformed from ceremonial to protective. The monarchy found itself navigating a dual crisis, balancing a public health battle with the continuous threat of transactional exposure from across the Atlantic. This environment set the stage for the first major rupture, a moment that exposed the profound divide within the family. During a high-profile diplomatic itinerary that brought the king and queen close to American soil, the global audience fully expected a private breakthrough, an overseas family reunion away from the suffocating gaze of the British press. The public narrative offered standard logistical explanations, citing a crowded schedule and state responsibilities. But the psychological reality was a deliberate quarantine. What appeared to be a conflict of calendars was actually the implementation of an ironclad boundary. It was a message sent not through a formal press release, but through a total refusal of access, establishing a precedent that the doors to the monarch were no longer open to emotional negotiation. The true architecture of this exclusion became undeniable with the sudden disappearance of the Highgrove portrait. When a visiting photographer captured an image of the room, viewers immediately noticed the subtle substitution, a moment of visual humiliation captured in a simple frame. In the high-stakes world of royal public relations, nothing is accidental. The removal of the wedding photograph was a deliberate signal, an undoing of history that exposed the depth of the internal estrangement. For Harry and Meghan, this small detail carried a devastating weight, serving as symbolic evidence that their narrative was being actively dismantled inside the king's private sanctuary. Behind this systematic displacement lies a deep psychological truth driven by a fierce sense of marital duty. Queen Camilla has assumed the role of the ultimate gatekeeper, operating with a cold, refined discipline that refuses to tolerate further disruption. Her justification is rooted in a simple, unyielding principle. Whenever the question of forgiveness is raised for the sake of family peace, she points directly to the extensive public record of disclosures, the tell-all memoirs, and the televised indictments that have targeted the core of the family. From her perspective, letting the Sussexes back into the fold is not an act of compassion. It is an invitation to further institutional chaos. She recognizes that the currency of the modern exile is information and a monarch in a vulnerable state cannot afford to be used as raw material for the next commercial media project. This unyielding stance has intensified a long-standing mutual hostility that dates back decades. Prince Harry has never concealed his deep disdain for his stepmother, famously characterizing her as a dangerous figure who sacrificed his personal security on the altar of her own public relations rehabilitation. For years, he viewed her as the architect of his mother's unhappiness, a perception later documented in bitter prose for the entire world to read. This history of hostility means that the current power dynamic is a two-way street. Having endured years of public condemnation from her stepson, the Queen, now holds the definitive upper hand, and she is exercising it with absolute institutional authority. She owes him no diplomatic concessions, and every boundary she enforces is justified as an act of devotion to a husband who requires peace above all else. Yet just as this fortress of isolation appears entirely impenetrable, the story undergoes a profound and volatile shift. While the Queen reinforces the perimeter, a quiet counter-operation has begun to emerge from the deepest corners of the palace. King Charles, navigating the twilight of his reign and the sobering reality of his illness, has begun to show signs of a deeply human vulnerability. Behind closed doors, the monarch has started softening, driven by a father's instinct that refuses to completely sever the bond with his youngest son. Reports have emerged that the king has quietly instructed a senior, trusted diplomat within his private office to initiate a discreet back-channel communication. The objective is to explore the possibility of a highly private encounter when Harry returns to the United Kingdom this summer for the Invictus Games milestone. This hidden maneuver sets up an unprecedented, high-stakes collision within the very heart of the monarchy. It places the king's private emotional longing in direct opposition to the Queen's unyielding wall of defense. As the summer deadline approaches, the tension inside the royal household has reached a breaking point, creating a profound crisis of authority where a vulnerable king's desire to see his son must clash with a protective queen's determination to keep an operative of commercial disruption outside the gates. The revelation of this secret reconciliation operation exposes the agonizing paradox at the center of King Charles's reign. On one side, he is a monarch bound by a lifetime of constitutional duty and the relentless demand for institutional survival. On the other, he is an elderly father facing his own profound mortality, haunted by the specter of a deeply estranged son. The deployment of a trusted private secretary to orchestrate a covert meeting this upcoming July is a desperate, deeply human attempt to bypass the very security apparatus his wife has meticulously constructed. But in the modern royal court, secrets are a luxury that rarely survive the afternoon, and this hidden maneuver has only forced the internal power dynamics into the blinding light of day. Queen Camilla is acutely aware of the king's back-channel efforts, and her response has been one of absolute unyielding discipline. She is not operating out of petty vindictiveness, but rather a chillingly clear-eyed assessment of threat. For the Queen, the situation is a simple mathematical equation of public relations survival. She knows that any private emotional concession made by the king will immediately be weaponized as commercial currency in California. Every private conversation, every shared tear, and every fatherly embrace carries the terrifying potential to become a chapter in a future memoir or a highly produced segment in a streaming documentary. Her total blockade is designed to starve the Montecito public relations machine of the exact oxygen it desperately requires to survive. This brings us to the devastating contrast of the Duke of Sussex's current reality. When Prince Harry arrives in the United Kingdom this July for the Invictus Games countdown, he will be stepping onto British soil not as a returning conquering hero, but as a man cornered by his own commercial desperation. The empire he and Meghan Markle attempted to build in America was founded on a finite and rapidly depleting resource, which was the monetization of royal grievance. They sold their trauma, they sold their family secrets, and they sold their proximity to the throne. But once that inventory was emptied, the global market began to lose interest. To secure future corporate contracts and maintain their illusion of global power, they require the constant lingering perception of royal access. They need the world to believe that, despite the noise, they still hold a VIP pass to the British monarchy. Camilla's brilliance lies in her complete understanding of this transactional dynamic. By effectively shutting the gates and ensuring the king remains inaccessible, she is not just protecting her husband's health, she is financially and socially paralyzing the Sussex brand. It is a masterful stroke of psychological warfare. She is forcing Harry to live with the exact independence he so publicly demanded. The tragic irony is impossible to ignore. A man who spent years broadcasting his desperate need to escape the toxic confines of his family is now commercially reliant on proving to the world that he can still get back inside. Furthermore, the Queen does not stand alone in this fortress. The undeniable subtext of the last year is the forged, unbreakable alliance between Queen Camilla and Prince William. Historically, their relationship was complex, fraught with the shadows of the past. But nothing unites an empire quite like a shared adversary. The Prince of Wales views his brother's actions not just as an insult, but as an unforgivable betrayal of their shared history and their late mother's legacy of duty. While the king may harbor a soft paternal weakness, William acts as the enforcer of Camilla's architectural boundaries. Together, they form an axis of power that is entirely impenetrable. They look at Harry and see a walking liability, a disruptor who burned down his own house and is now standing in the ashes demanding an invitation to dinner. This collective shift in power is exactly why the subtle interior changes at Highgrove House carry such devastating, permanent meaning. The removal of Harry and Meghan's wedding portrait was not an accident of interior design. Placing a photograph of King Charles cradling Prince Louis in its exact spot was a surgical, deeply symbolic message. It was a visual declaration of the future. Prince Louis represents the unbroken, secure line of succession. He represents a future unbothered by the grievances of a self-exiled uncle. The visual replacement silently communicated that the institution has moved on. The royal family is no longer holding a space open for the prodigal son. The vacancy has been filled. This is ultimately why this story resonates so deeply with millions of viewers across the globe. Stripped of the castles, the titles, and the geopolitical weight, this is a profoundly universal tragedy about the consequences of crossing the point of no return. It forces us to witness the agonizing reality that you cannot publicly destroy the people who loved you and then expect the door to remain unlocked. It is a story about the weaponization of victimhood and the harsh realization that some bridges, once burned for a massive payout, can never be rebuilt, no matter how much you may need to cross them again. As July approaches, the world will watch an extraordinary psychological thriller play out in real time. Prince Harry will land in his homeland, hoping to project the image of a global statesman returning for a noble cause, quietly desperate for a photograph or a leaked story confirming a reunion with his father. But he will find himself navigating an environment completely engineered by Queen Camilla. If a meeting happens, it will be under her draconian terms, heavily monitored and stripped of any commercial utility. If it does not happen, it will be the ultimate humiliating confirmation of his permanent exile. What looked like a missing photograph in a country house was actually the prologue to the final act. Queen Camilla has drawn a line in the sand, not with malice, but with the cold, necessary restraint of a leader protecting her sovereign. The era of royal apologies and endless olive branches has officially concluded. The gates are closed, the locks are changed, and the Duke of Sussex is finally entirely on his own. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the shifting power dynamics of the British monarchy. If you found this analysis insightful, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We will continue to monitor these subtle but devastating signals as the July deadline approaches. Until next time, stay observant.